Lal Wenstrom, the Subspace Meditator, speaking to you once again for the fourth time, and a bit under the weather this time, on our series of meditations on Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Now, in continuing our discussion from the previous installment, the Social Justice Crusade, I wanted to pick up with part 2 of that installment, in which I discuss the reasoning behind the social justice agenda, which I believe was very present in The Force Awakens, and in particular, what I believe to be a very feministic and gynocentric agenda that was portrayed on the screen, and the reasons behind that agenda. And I get more specific into that in this installment. Now, as before, I will be reading to you my opinion, and that opinion will be available to you as a link in the low bar at my blogspot, which will link to my blogspot, the talaxionparticle.blogspot.com. And you will also see there links to other articles which I used to help me write this opinion, in which were showcased the ideas of the feminist philosophy that went into the creation of the character of Rey, as you can see here, and of the other female characters who showed up in the story, such as Maze Kanata, Captain Phasma, and the plethora of female pilots and console operators and stormtroopers and other things of this nature that you were able to see in the movie. Now, I believe that there was a definite agenda here. I believe that J.J. Abrams and Kathleen Kennedy made plain that agenda in their own statements, and I will be using some of their own words, which you will see at these articles. You will see in those articles that are linked in the description box, in which you can go and research for yourself. Now, your opinion may be different from mine, and I am perfectly willing to accept that. But these are my thoughts on the matter. And so I wanted to articulate this because I don't think that this agenda was necessary. I think this agenda is flawed. And quite frankly, I think that there are many examples of the types of women which J.J. Abrams and Kathleen Kennedy seem to conveniently dismiss as either not existing, never having existed before, or are so marginal and insignificant as to be basically invisible. So I'm going to point out why these arguments are flawed, and why what we were subjected to with The Force Awakens was totally without cause. So let's get started. I continue from the last installment with the next section of my article on the Social Justice Crusade, and the next section is entitled, "But Why Repeat These Elements Ad Nauseum?" And I start off with a quote from J.J. Abrams, Episode 7 director himself. Mr. Abrams says, "Star Wars was always a boys' thing, and a movie that dads could take their sons to. And although this is still very much the case, I was really hoping this could be a movie that mothers could take their daughters to as well." And I think even in that statement alone, you see a number of different things that should jump out at you as far as the ideological bent of Mr. Abrams and where he's coming from. Such statements such as Star Wars was always a boys' thing, and a movie that dads could take their sons to, as if there were the presence of Princess Leia in any of the other movies simply did not exist, and the presence of other female personalities in the prequels simply did not exist either. The marginalization, it seems to me, implicit in these statements of not only Princess Leia, but of Padme Amidala, the marginalization of many of the female Jedi who were present in the prequels, including some of the council members themselves. This seems to me to be a statement that shows you where this man is coming from and how he proceeds in thinking of his movies. And I think you'll see that even more when you look at some of the articles that I've linked to in the low bar. However, let's continue. The answer I claim, and I'm continuing to read here now, the answer I claim to not only the girls are awesome trope that runs through The Force Awakens, but also to raise overcompensatory coolness, can be found in the statements of both Lucasfilm's CEO Kathleen Kennedy and Episode 7 director J.J. Abrams, each of which has candidly asserted their desire to use The Force Awakens as a vehicle to promote the empowerment of girls and women in science fiction and the real world at large. Now, there is nothing wrong with this idea in principle. If women wish equal rights and privileges in society, that of course will entail full-fledged access to equal opportunity, with the accompanying equal responsibility and accountability to boot. For every right, as many of you know, there is an equally accompanying responsibility. For every privilege, there is an equal accountability. So what we are talking about here is responsibility and accountability, the twin pillars of liberty in any society that believes in democracy. But let's continue. However, time and again, social justice warriors, particularly of the white female feminist variety, attempt to convince us that images of strong, competent women in the media of science fiction, such as the 1960 Star Trek Lieutenant Uhura, whom I talked about before in our last installment, simply either do not exist or are so few and far between as to be inconsequential and unimportant, especially to the inspiration and imagination of girls and women. And thus, in order to compensate for this alleged inadequacy, we must be utterly overwhelmed in modern-day entertainment with this imagination becomes reality scenario. Fiery but dignified women who can fight stronger and better trained men to the ground, or at the least to a draw. Sharp, intelligent chicks whose technological wizardry runs circles around their male counterparts. Or, on the other side of things, cynical and potty-mouthed women whose sardony and sexual liberation puts even a drunken sailor's lifestyle to shame. But this perceived lack of strong women in science fiction is not true, and further has not been for decades. Now, I will not attempt to catalog every incarnation of tough, diligent female leaders in science fiction and fantasy over the last 40 to 50 years, whether they be in film or print media, because to do so would require multiple pages, not just several of them, multiple ones. And suffice it to say, the information is out there, and just doing a cursory search on the internet will prove this case. And I actually cite a few examples even there at my blog and in previous installments of this meditation. But just to name a few more, some of you will probably remember Sarah Connor from the Terminator series, as played by Linda Hamilton. Ellen Ripley in the Alien series, as played by the elegant Sigourney Weaver. You will probably also remember, some of you may remember her less, but you will probably, those of you who are real science fiction buffs, will probably remember Diana from the 1980s sci-fi hit series V, as played by Jane Badler. And others of you will probably remember her less, but I'm sure you remember the series Babylon 5, these you big sci-fi Babylon 5 fans like me, and you will remember Susan Ivanova, as played by Claudia Christian, actually one of my personal favorite characters from that series. And if you also remember the very last year of that series, Captain Elizabeth Lockley, whom I don't remember the actress who played her. And then, of course, you have, who else can we name? How about Dana Catherine Scully from the X-Files, which is now having a reboot, taking place for 6 episodes. It's played by Gillian Anderson for 9 long years, and yet somehow or another, I guess feminists have forgotten about her too. There are many other examples that we can name here, people. So I think that, the point is sufficiently made. This is a nonsensical argument that many of these social justice warriors are making. And so there's the notion that there's some perceived lack of female role models for young girls and women to aspire to emulate in science fiction is just that. It's a notion. It's a perception. It's an incorrect one, and one which continues to be more demonstrably untrue as the examples continue to multiply in the fiction stories of the current era. So I ask this question, and it's an honest question. Miss Kennedy, Mr. Abrams, was it absolutely necessary to hound us with something that most intelligent sci-fi adherents already know and which most of us have no objection to seeing? Was it absolutely necessary for you to give us this individual Rey, who was a very undeveloped or underdeveloped representation of girl power in your story, just to represent girl power, and to give us that representation in a manner which was quite frankly inadequate to the many other representations that have gone before her? I argue not.